You were always your mother's mistake, not mine. That's what he said. No hesitation, no glance to see who might have heard him. He didn't whisper it either, just dropped it like a paperclip in the hallway, careless and cold. I didn't flinch. I stood there, holding my file folder tight to my chest, watching the knot in his tie twitch as he straightened it again. His lawyer was talking to someone near the courtroom door. Derek was nowhere in sight. It was just him and me, the way it used to be. Except now, we weren't in a kitchen or living room or garden. We were about to step into a courtroom. And I wasn't his little girl anymore. He smiled, that same hollow, dismissive smile he used to flash when I tried to explain why Derek's name was on the savings withdrawal slip again. I didn't ask for this, Dad, I said calmly. You're the one suing me, remember? He waved a hand like I'd asked him about the weather. You manipulated a sick man, Claire. The court's gonna see that. I looked at him for a long moment. There wasn't a trace of doubt in his eyes, not a flicker of guilt, just certainty. The kind that comes from believing the truth was whatever you said loudest. My name's on everything because Mom trusted me, I said quietly, and she died trusting the wrong person. It wasn't the words. It was the way he said them, so soft, so sure. I felt something give inside my chest. Not a snap, just a shift, like a door closing. I turned and walked past him without another word. Not because I didn't have one, but because I knew I didn't need to explain anything anymore. Not to him. My name is Claire Watson. I'm 47 years old. I live in a small town in Connecticut and work part-time as a bookkeeper. I'm not flashy. I'm not loud. I don't post about my life or make scenes. I pay my bills. I take care of my garden. I read a lot. And for most of my adult life, I've taken care of my father. Willingly, quietly, stupidly. I thought that meant something. I thought loyalty would be enough. I was wrong. When Mom passed, he didn't cry at the service. He didn't hug me or Derek. He just stood there, arms folded, like he was waiting for someone to finish a speech that was taking too long. Then afterward, he pulled me aside and said, "The house stays in my name. I don't want any confusion." As if I'd been planning to take it. As if I hadn't already spent 10 years in the guest house behind it, paying rent, buying groceries, and driving him to his appointments while Derek sent Christmas cards from Denver. I didn't say anything then. I nodded and walked away. But I remembered. That moment. That tone. A month later, I got the first legal notice. He was challenging power of attorney, said I'd tricked him into signing it, said I'd stolen from him. I sat at the kitchen table and read every line, twice. Then I folded the paper, placed it in a manila folder, and made tea. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I just made tea and sat with the quiet for a while. Because that's what betrayal feels like when it's done by someone who raised you. It doesn't feel sharp. It feels empty. I thought of Mom, of how tired she looked those last few months. She never said much about Dad, even near the end, but I remembered her hand on mine once, right after a long appointment. She said, "Claire, don't let them talk circles around you. You always see clearer than they do." I didn't know what she meant at the time, but I do now. We were called into court. I walked ahead of him and his attorney. The hallway was long, and my heels echoed on the tile. I could feel him watching me, not out of sentiment, out of calculation. He was already shaping how I'd look to the judge. Fragile, bitter, manipulative. He didn't know I'd brought the letter. It's still sealed. I haven't opened it since the day I found it, tucked inside Mom's old planner, behind an expired prescription refill. It's addressed to me in her handwriting. No return address, no stamps. Just Claire, in blue ink. I take it with me to every meeting, every filing, every hearing. Not because I'm sure what it says, but because I know one day I'll need it. One day, it'll be the only thing left that tells the truth when everyone else is lying with a straight face. And maybe I'm not ready to open it yet. Maybe I'm still holding on to the idea that things can be settled without it. That Dad will realize what he's doing, that Derek will stop hiding behind him. But I know better. Because when someone looks you in the eye and says, "You're not my daughter anymore," you stop waiting for peace. you start planning for clarity. I sat on the courtroom bench and held the envelope in my lap. My fingers brushed the edge, slow and deliberate. I didn't look at it. I just held it there, like a match I wasn't ready to strike. I thought about everything he'd taken from her, from me, and everything he was still trying to take. And I told myself, when the time is right, this opens. Until then, I keep watching, I keep remembering, and I don't let them see me flinch. If you've ever been told you don't belong by the very people who raised you, then I think you'll want to hear the rest. Maybe stick around. This isn't just a court case, it's everything they didn't expect me to remember. And it's not over yet. He stood next to the casket with his hands behind his back like it was a business meeting. He didn't look at her photo. He didn't speak to the guests. He just waited for the pastor to finish. When I stepped up to read the passage Mom had underlined in her Bible, he didn't even nod. And when the service ended, he turned to me and said, "No need to read the will. It's all mine anyway." That was the first moment I saw it. The flicker, the fear behind the eyes of a man who only felt safe when everyone around him stayed small. I didn't argue. I didn't ask where it was. I just nodded, kissed my fingertips, and touched the lid of the casket. She always liked lilacs. I'd brought 2 bundles for the graveside, one for her, one for the bench beside it. He left before they were buried. After everyone else went home, I stayed behind with the groundskeeper and helped sweep the leaves. It felt better than going back to the guest house. Everything there still smelled like her. Lemon polish, ivory soap, and the faint hint of chamomile tea. 3 days later, I walked into her room for the first time since she passed. Everything was neat. Her slippers lined up, her mirror cloth still folded, her jewelry box closed. I didn't expect to find anything. I just wanted to feel close to her. But when I opened the desk drawer, there it was, a pale blue folder with my name on a tab. Inside, 2 things. 1, a copy of a legal draft. Not the final will, but a version she'd worked on with her lawyer. It listed the property in both our names, not just his, mine too. 2, a letter. Not typed, handwritten. In that slanted, careful script she always used for birthday cards. The envelope was sealed, but the front said, "Claire, if he ever turns on you." I didn't open it right away. I stared at it for an hour. Then I placed it in my sock drawer like it was made of glass. I didn't want to believe it. Even after everything, I still wanted to think maybe he was just grieving badly. That the way he'd shut me out, the way he dismissed me during the service, maybe it was just shock. But that sentence kept ringing in my head. It's all mine anyway. He didn't ask me how I was. He didn't ask if I'd eaten. He asked where the deed was. I told him I didn't know. He laughed. "Of course you don't. You never were the sharp one." That night, I took the will draft to the kitchen table and laid it out. The language was clear. Mom had named me as co-owner. She'd added a clause about lifetime tenancy. I remember the lawyer calling once, asking if I was available to meet. I'd said yes. She never followed up. Now I wonder if Dad made her stop. I read every word twice. Then I put it back in the folder, locked it in my fireproof box, and sat there for hours in the dark. The next morning, I went to the courthouse and requested the deed records. My name wasn't on them. I asked when the last change was filed. 2 months before Mom died. Her signature was missing. That's when I knew. He'd never filed the new will. He'd kept the draft hidden, just in case she decided to push back. And when she didn't, he claimed everything by default, like he always did. I started asking quiet questions. I didn't tell Derek. He was somewhere in Arizona, chasing another startup. He hadn't called during the funeral, just texted, "Let me know if you need anything." I didn't reply. Dad brought in a lawyer a week later, said he needed to secure his estate. That's when the papers started arriving. Quiet at first, then louder. They accused me of coercion, said I'd taken advantage of his illness, that I'd tricked him into signing medical authorizations and bank access forms. I was the one paying the bills, but apparently I'd been stealing from him all along. I didn't defend myself. Not then, I just kept documenting. Every transaction, every call, every note. One night, I took out Mom's letter. The seal opened cleanly. Inside, 4 pages. Each word written like she knew it would be read on a rainy night with the lights low. She wrote about the quiet things, how she saw me trying, how she watched him take and never once say thank you, how she regretted staying silent. She apologized for not protecting me more, said she thought love would fix it all, said she realized too late that love doesn't work when only one person is trying. And then on the last page, at the very bottom, in red ink, she wrote, "Only show this if he tries to take what's yours." I stared at that sentence until my vision blurred. She knew. She knew this day would come, and she left me a way through it. That's when I made the decision. I wouldn't yell. I wouldn't beg. I wouldn't cry in court or shake on the stand. I would document. I would watch. And when the moment was right, I would show exactly what he chose to ignore. That red ink didn't feel angry. It felt like a hand on my shoulder, guiding me through the dark. He'd forgotten who raised me, but I hadn't, and that's going to matter. That guest house was never meant to be permanent. That's what he said. Right after I finished trimming the hedges out front, I still had gardening gloves on. My shirt stuck to my back. I'd spent the last 3 hours clearing out his overgrown side path so the nurse could get the wheelchair through without scraping the wall. And he was standing there, arms crossed, like I'd asked for a deed. I said, "I didn't think it was. You asked me to move in, remember?" He blinked. "I said you could stay a few weeks. You took advantage." I could have reminded him about the night he slipped in the kitchen, how I drove him to the ER because Derek didn't pick up, how I gave up my apartment 2 weeks later because the social worker said he'd need round-the-clock care. But what would that change? In his mind, I'd never done anything but show up uninvited. I moved into that guest house when I was 35. My lease was ending. Mom was exhausted. He wasn't walking steadily anymore. I offered to stay for the summer. That summer turned into 11 years. I paid him rent. Not a discount. Full market rent. I paid the electric, the cable, even the garbage service. He said if I was going to live there, I had to be financially responsible. Derek always offered to pay, he once told me, but he had dreams. I didn't want to burden him. I didn't say anything. I just nodded and mailed another check. I handled everything. When the hot water tank broke, I paid for the replacement. When the roof started leaking, I called the contractor. When the lawn grew too wild, I mowed it, every week, without being asked. He never thanked me, not once. If anything, he treated it like I was making up for something. Once, after a long week of work and appointments and late-night med sorting, I asked if we could hire someone to help with the grocery runs. He looked at me and said, "You've always been the one with time, Claire. That's your contribution." I told myself it was just the stroke talking, that maybe it scrambled his ability to be kind. But the truth is, it didn't change him. It revealed him. He started keeping a list on the fridge, things I needed to do before I left for work. Take out the trash, pick up the dry cleaning, reschedule his dentist appointment. I did all of it, every day for years. When Derek visited, which was rare, he'd stay in the main house, feed up, talking loud about his latest job, his travel plans, his stress. Dad would light up like someone plugged him into a socket. One Thanksgiving, Derek showed up with a bottle of wine and no luggage, stayed one night, ate half the turkey, left in the morning. After he was gone, Dad turned to me and said, "You could learn something from him. He knows how to live." I was washing dishes. I remember my hands were shaking, but I didn't drop the glass. "I know how to stay," I said. "That's worth something too." He didn't answer, just walked out of the room. When the lawsuit came, one of the claims listed was unauthorized occupancy of private property. They said I'd stayed in the guest house without permission, that I'd created a financial burden on my father, that I'd taken control of utilities that didn't belong to me. That last part made me laugh. I'd been paying the bills for so long, I'd forgotten they were even in his name. I kept every receipt, every invoice. I had folders in the closet sorted by year. The night before our next court hearing, I pulled out the box and started reviewing everything again. One envelope felt heavier. Tucked inside was a water bill from 2 years ago. Nothing unusual at first glance. Usage, due date, address. But then I saw the bottom. A signature. Not mine. Not Dad's. I leaned in. The account name was under my father's initials, but the payment receipt had been notarized. And it was signed by Derek. The date lined up with his last visit, the one he said was for family bonding. He must have made the payment for show, then kept the slip. But for some reason, it ended up in my folder. He knew what it meant, that I was paying, not squatting, that I was running the house, not draining it. And if he knew, Dad knew too. They were trying to rewrite the past, line by line, as if memory could be redacted like court documents. But paper doesn't lie. Signatures don't shift with sentiment. I placed the receipt in a new folder, labeled it evidence. Sometimes the truth doesn't scream, sometimes it just waits quietly until someone bothers to read it. Didn't expect to see you here, Claire. That was the first thing out of Derek's mouth when I walked into the mediation room. Not a hello, not a nod, just a smirk, and that line. He leaned back in the leather chair like he owned the building. His suit was expensive, newer than anything I'd ever seen him wear, and his watch looked like it belonged to someone with steady income, which I knew he didn't have. I stood across from him and didn't respond. Not right away. I looked over at the legal pad in front of him, the one with Dad's attorney's name stamped on the corner. That's when I understood. He wasn't just visiting. He was part of this. You're on his legal team, I said. Derek smiled, tilted his head slightly. He needed someone who actually knows what's going on. I nodded. Just once. That quiet, resigned kind of nod that says more than words. I sat down slowly and folded my hands in my lap. You haven't been home in 4 years, I said. Not since the hospital. You left before Mom was discharged. He shrugged. She had you. That line hit harder than I expected. Not because it surprised me, but because he said it like it was a favor, like I'd been a built-in nurse. I guess you didn't want to be there when she asked for you, I said. When she was too weak to hold a pen, but still remembered your birthday. His jaw tightened for a second. Barely. But I caught it. I've always caught the small tells. The twitch of his eye when he lies, the sudden silence when he's backed into a corner. He hated that about me. Growing up, Derek was always the wild one. He totaled 2 cars before 21, racked up 5 credit cards under Dad's name, and spent more nights on friends' couches than in his own bed. Every time he called home, it was because he needed something. Every time he came home, it was to take something. And every single time, Dad forgave him. You have to understand, Dad would say. He's just wired different. Meanwhile, I got warnings for leaving the porch light on, for using too much laundry detergent, for asking for gas money when I was between jobs. When Derek took out a loan in Dad's name and defaulted, I was the one who cleaned it up. I spoke to the bank. I wrote the letters. I offered to cover the overdraft until Dad's next check came in. I didn't get a thank you. I got silence. And now here he was, suited up, sitting at the other end of the table, smiling like none of it ever happened. I'm just trying to help Dad protect what's his, he said. You know he's not all there anymore. I looked at him, really looked. Is that what you think? I asked. That I'm taking advantage of him? He tapped his pen against the pad. You've been living on the property rent-free for over a decade. That's when I laughed. Quiet, but sharp. You really think I haven't been paying bills? That I didn't cover groceries, insurance, maintenance? You think I just floated through the last 11 years on goodwill? He opened his mouth, then closed it. His pen stilled. I have receipts, Derek, I said. Every one of them. I'm not the bad guy here, Claire. No, I said. You just showed up when there was something left to fight over. That got him. He sat back, eyes narrowing just a little. Dad's sick. He needed someone with a spine. Mom was sick too, I said. Where were you then? His lips parted like he had something ready. A rehearsed line maybe, but nothing came out. I asked about you every week, I said. She didn't want much, just to hear your voice, even once. He cleared his throat, looked away. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the overhead lights. I don't need your guilt trip, he muttered. This isn't guilt, I said. This is memory. There's a difference. He stood up suddenly, walked to the water cooler like it was the most urgent task in the world. I watched his back, the same back that disappeared down the hospital hallway the night Mom had her last fall. Said he needed to catch a flight. Never came back. You know, I said, I found something after she passed. A letter, written by her. He turned slightly, cup in hand. So? So I've been thinking, I said. Maybe you should read it. Before the next hearing. He froze for half a second. Then he tried to mask it with a sip. What's in it? He asked. I looked him in the eye. Did you read Mom's final letter? His hand twitched. The cup tilted. Water sloshed onto the floor. He didn't notice. He didn't answer. Just turned back toward the table, grabbed his pad, and walked out. Didn't even look at me. And for the first time in years, I wasn't the one left speechless. He's not mentally fit to understand what she's doing to him. That's how it started. His lawyer, young, sharp suit, not a day over 35, said it like I wasn't even in the room, like I was some shadowy figure siphoning money from a man too frail to count. I looked straight ahead. My palms were open on the table. I kept my breathing even. The judge, a woman maybe in her 60s, nodded without giving much away. She turned to me and said, Ms. Watson, you may respond. I didn't clear my throat or shuffle papers. I just spoke. I'd like to submit these, I said, placing a folder gently on the table. Receipts, maintenance logs, notarized utility transfers, all tied to the property, all in my name. His lawyer didn't look at the papers. He looked at my father, as if to say, You didn't mention this. Dad didn't blink. He just stared forward, arms crossed, as if the courtroom were a waiting room and none of this mattered. I also have a notarized draft of a will, I added, signed by my mother, naming me as co-owner. Now that got their attention. The lawyer leaned forward. That document is not valid. I didn't say it was valid, I replied. I said it was signed. A low murmur rippled through the room. The judge held up her hand and nodded at me to continue. My mother asked me to care for this property. She left me everything she could, in the only way she could. I never forged a signature. I never made a decision without consent. And I certainly never stole. Dad scoffed. You helped yourself. I looked at him. To what? The hospital bills? The late-night falls? The broken sink I fixed with my own money? He rolled his eyes. You were living there rent-free. I reached into the folder and pulled out a stapled packet. These are my monthly rent checks, every one from the past 7 years, endorsed and deposited. The lawyer shifted in his seat. The judge took the papers and flipped through them slowly. He didn't remember cashing them, the lawyer said. I said nothing. I didn't need to. I also have care logs, I added, medication schedules, appointment sheets. I documented everything. Not for court, just so I wouldn't miss anything. The judge glanced at me, then back at my father. Mr. Watson, she said slowly, you stated in your affidavit that you paid the annual property taxes in full the past 10 years. Dad nodded. Would you please look at this form? She asked, sliding a scanned receipt across the desk. And tell me if this is your signature. For the first time all morning, his hands hesitated. His fingers hovered above the page like they didn't know what to do. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came. It's dated March 3rd, the judge said. Same day your daughter submitted a payment from her account, which is also recorded here. He pulled the paper closer, read it slowly, and leaned back in his chair. That's not mine. The judge raised an eyebrow. Then whose is it? Dad didn't answer. The silence wasn't loud. It was thin and fragile. It hung between us like a thread that could snap with one more lie. I paid it, I said. I always did. I kept my voice steady, even as my hands shook. If you've ever had to stay calm while someone rewrites your history, you'll understand. I hope you'll stay with me. This isn't just about property. It's about finally being heard. Like and subscribe if you've ever had to prove your worth in silence. The judge leaned back, quiet. The lawyer whispered something to my father, but he didn't respond. He just stared at the wall behind me. I could see the red flush rising up his neck. I thought of Mom, how she used to sign her name with a flourish, even on grocery lists. How she always said, "Truth has a sound, listen for it." The judge turned to me again. "Ms. Watson, we'll take a recess. You may step down." I gathered my things slowly, keeping my head high. As I walked past my father's chair, I caught the edge of his sleeve out of the corner of my eye. He didn't move, didn't even twitch, but I knew he'd felt it. The quiet unraveling of his story, the beginning of something he couldn't stop. $10,000 and silence. That's what his lawyer said, as if those two things belonged in the same sentence. He slid the offer across the table like it was something I should be grateful for, like it was mercy, a favor. Derek leaned back in his chair with a crooked smile. "Honestly, Claire, it's more than you deserve." I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes on the paper in front of me, the bold heading, the terms, the signature line waiting for mine. "Accepting this means the house stays in your father's name," the lawyer added, smoothing his tie. "You'll vacate the property within 30 days. No public statements. No further legal claims. In return, we avoid dragging this through court." The way he said dragging made it sound dirty, like I was the problem, like the mess belonged to me. I folded my hands in my lap, let the silence stretch. Derek chuckled under his breath. "Come on, Claire. You've been squatting in that guest house for years. This is a clean way out." I looked up at him. "You mean a quiet one?" He shrugged. "Call it what you want. It's more generous than I expected him to be." I took a breath through my nose, slow and steady. "You think I want money?" I asked. The lawyer cleared his throat. "It's not about that. It's about resolution. Closure." "No," I said. "It's about covering tracks." They both paused. "I have receipts, not just payments. Time and care. I was the one here when she couldn't walk. I was the one changing sheets at 2 in the morning while you were on a cruise." Derek rolled his eyes. "Here we go. You weren't here when she fell, Derek. You weren't here when she forgot where she was. You didn't see the way she cried when she remembered she'd never hear her son's voice again." His jaw tensed. "I didn't need her to leave me a house. I needed her to not apologize every time you ignored her calls." "She never said that," he said flatly. "She did. More than once." They didn't reply. The lawyer leaned forward again. "Claire, this is an opportunity to step away from all of this with some dignity." That word, dignity. It rang louder than the rest. I reached into my bag and placed a folded document on the table. The paper was soft from being opened and closed too many times, the ink slightly smudged in one corner. I let it sit there, untouched, between us. "What's that?" the lawyer asked. I looked at my father, seated across the room in silence, not even pretending to pay attention. I looked at Derek, at the offer they'd crafted so carefully. Then I turned to the lawyer. "My mother's will," I said. "The real one." The color drained from Derek's face. "You sure you want to do this in court?" I asked. Quiet, calm, direct. No one answered, but I could hear it, the sound of something shifting, just beneath the silence. No one expected her to fight. That's what the woman said when I walked in. No greeting, no handshake, just that. Quiet, thoughtful, and not unkind. I nodded once. I didn't have much to say. My energy had shifted, and people like her, the kind who'd seen too many families claw at each other after a funeral, could sense it before I even opened my mouth. Her name was Evelyn Rooker. She looked to be in her 60s, maybe early 70s. Sharp eyes, soft mouth. Her office smelled like coffee and old wood, the kind of place where truth didn't need a spotlight. It just lingered. "I remember your mother clearly," she said, motioning for me to sit. "She was always precise. Made lists for everything. Liked to talk things out before signing anything." I smiled faintly. Sounds like her. Evelyn reached into a drawer, pulled out a thick folder, and set it between us. I kept this, just in case, she said. Your mother came to see me twice in the last year before she passed. The second time she brought this. Inside was more than just the signed will. There were notes, pages of them, her handwriting, her voice, literally her voice. There are voice memos, Evelyn said, already unlocking a dusty old phone and handing over a pair of headphones. She dictated everything she wanted, even left instructions in case someone contested. I took a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. I pressed play. There she was, my mother, tired but clear. If you're hearing this, Claire, it means I've gone, and they're trying to twist my words. I closed my eyes. I never meant for this to turn into a war. But if they push you, sweetheart, don't back down. I left you that house for a reason. My throat tightened, but I didn't cry. Not now. There's more, Evelyn said, gently tapping a yellow notepad. Appointment logs, witness statements. One of her nurses even signed an affidavit. Why wasn't any of this in the official filing? Because no one asked for it, she replied. They filed their version. I kept hers. I looked at the dates, each visit, each note, all lined up like a quiet timeline of intent. A woman planning her legacy while dying slowly in a room where half the family had stopped visiting. You understand what this means? Evelyn asked me. I nodded. It means I'm not walking into that courtroom alone. She tilted her head. Would you like me to testify, Claire? I didn't answer right away. I sat with the weight of her question, letting it sink into the silence. Testify. That word echoed louder than it should have. Not because I was afraid. Not anymore. But because it meant someone else had seen it too. The truth. It wasn't just my word against theirs anymore. I looked at Evelyn. Would you? She gave a small shrug, almost casual. I've done it before. I've seen worse families than yours. But your mother, she mattered to me. And so does her truth. There it was again. The kind of quiet conviction that didn't need volume to shake the room. She slid another folder toward me. This one's from her first visit. Notes on who she trusted, who she didn't. Your name was circled 3 times. I swallowed hard. She knew it would come to this. She suspected, Evelyn said, especially when your father came in a week later asking questions. I looked up. He came here. Evelyn nodded. Didn't mention your mother's visit. Acted like he was the sole executor. Tried to rewrite what had already been written. That sounded like him. I leaned back, letting it all wash over me. The years of being told I was ungrateful, dramatic, selfish. The way Dad could look me in the eye and twist the truth until even I started to doubt my memory. But my mother didn't doubt me. She'd seen through it, and she'd prepared for this moment. Why didn't you come forward sooner? I asked, softer than I meant to. Evelyn sighed. Because I knew it had to be you. Your fight, your voice. If I stepped in too early, it would have looked like noise. But now it's time. I nodded slowly. My fingers rested on the folder, then opened it fully. There it was. A date, a signature. Her final words in writing. My daughter Claire is to receive the house, the savings account, and all items of sentimental value without condition. No room for confusion. No way to twist it. You sure they'll allow it in court? I asked. They won't have a choice, she said. Not once I'm on the stand. A part of me wanted to cry. Not out of sadness, out of relief. I had carried the burden of proof alone for so long. I forgot what it felt like to be believed. I don't need money, I said quietly, almost to myself. I just needed someone to remember who she really was. She remembered you, Evelyn said. Every word in this file proves it. The room was still. Only the faint ticking of a wall clock marked time. I stared at the pages, each one anchoring me back to something solid. Maybe that's what justice really is. Not a dramatic speech or a courtroom victory. Just truth, laid out in black and white, and someone willing to stand beside it. Evelyn tapped the final sheet. There's a deposition date. I'll send you the schedule. I stood up. My legs didn't shake this time. My hands were steady. She walked me to the door. They won't see it coming. No, I said, but they'll feel it. And for the first time in years, I walked away not needing to look back. The courtroom felt colder this time, not physically, but in the way people looked at me, like they finally realized I wasn't here to grieve anymore. I was here to win. Dad was already seated with his lawyer. He didn't look at me. I didn't expect him to. The judge called us forward. I walked with steady steps, holding the folder Evelyn had handed me just 2 days earlier. Everything inside it had weight, real weight. My mother's voice, her notes, her signed affidavit. My father's lawyer stood, smirking like he always had the upper hand. He started rattling off dates and documents, arguing intent, questioning memory. I listened, but I didn't flinch. When it was my turn, I didn't speak right away. I let the room settle. Then I started. Your Honor, I have here a timeline prepared by my mother's original attorney. It includes signed receipts, recorded appointments, and witness statements that confirm her intentions regarding her estate. The judge raised an eyebrow. Proceed. I opened the folder, page by page. Here's a receipt from the pharmacy dated 3 days before she signed the contested will. It places her physically present and mentally aware. Here's a recorded memo of her voice, outlining the distribution of her estate. And this, I paused, holding up a statement, is a notarized letter from her live-in nurse, affirming that my mother was lucid and deliberate in her actions. My father shifted. Not much, just a hand twitch. But I noticed. The judge leaned in slightly. Is this nurse available to testify? She's on standby, Your Honor, as is the attorney who prepared the documents. I caught my father glancing at his lawyer. The smirk was gone. I kept going. There's also a signed document explicitly naming me as the sole beneficiary of the home, savings account, and possessions. It was signed 6 weeks before the version my father submitted. The judge took the paper, read it carefully, then looked up. Why wasn't this presented before? Because no one believed I had anything worth listening to. Silence. Dad finally spoke. She's lying. It was weak, hollow. I turned to him. Am I? He didn't respond. The judge looked at him. Do you have any evidence to contradict these documents? His lawyer stood, then sat back down. Nothing. And then it came. The moment. The judge adjusted his glasses. Miss Watson, is there anything else you'd like to add? I held the folder a moment longer, then slowly closed it. Yes, just 2 words. My eyes never left the judge. I didn't even glance at my father. Check everything. The room shifted, not audibly, just energy, stillness. Excuse me? The judge asked. I repeated it, quieter. Check everything. He nodded, then turned to the clerk. I want a full audit of all prior documents submitted by both parties. Original signatures, timestamps, metadata, everything. That's when I looked at Dad. He didn't move, didn't blink. I could see it. The calculation behind his eyes, the quiet panic. The judge recessed the court. People started whispering, rustling, standing. I stayed seated. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even look at him when I said it. But I watched the room change. I remembered the first time I walked into this courtroom. Quiet, scared, carrying nothing but hope in a folder I wasn't sure would matter. Back then, I still cared if he looked at me, still thought he might flinch or feel something close to guilt. But now, I didn't need any of that. I had proof. I had clarity. Somewhere in the back of the room, I heard someone murmur. A woman I didn't know leaned toward the person next to her. I didn't catch the words, but I recognized the look. Disbelief edged with respect. They didn't expect me to be the one holding the match. Because for years, I let them think I was small. I stayed quiet during dinners, nodded through insults, held my tongue when Dad rewrote history in front of others. That silence made them comfortable, until it didn't. The judge glanced at the affidavit again. And you're sure this signature was witnessed? He asked. Yes, by 2 people who are both prepared to confirm under oath. He nodded again, slower this time. I could almost feel the foundation cracking under my father's feet. Every lie he'd leaned on, about my mother's state of mind, about my absence, about who deserved what, was starting to collapse in real time. And yet, he didn't move. He just sat there, jaw clenched, as if still deciding which version of himself to become: the one who lost with dignity, or the one who dragged the whole family down with him. But it was too late either way. The judge had seen enough. More than that, he'd heard my mother's voice. And if you knew my mother, you'd know she didn't speak lightly. When court recessed, I didn't follow the others out. I sat still, watching the seal above the judge's bench like it was something sacred. Funny how a room I once feared now felt like the only place where my voice actually landed. My father didn't speak to me. He walked past like I was furniture, like none of this touched him. But his hands were trembling. I saw it when he picked up his briefcase. Tiny tremors, the kind you can't control when something's slipping out of your hands for good. As I stepped into the hallway, Evelyn was waiting. She didn't say anything, just handed me a water bottle and rested her hand on my shoulder. That gesture alone nearly undid me, not because I was tired, but because someone finally stood beside me without asking me to shrink. Outside, it was raining. Not heavy, just enough to blur the edges of things. I didn't rush to my car. I let the rain hit my coat, my skin, my scalp. For the first time in weeks, I felt clean. Have you ever seen the truth hit someone like a brick wall? What would you say if you only had 2 words left? I looked straight at the judge, then back at my father. I didn't smile. I didn't blink. I just said it, flat and clear. Medical fraud. The room went silent. Not quiet, silent. Like even the air held its breath. I saw the shift in Dad's face first. Not anger, not confusion. Fear. His skin went pale. His jaw tightened like he bit down on a truth that finally turned sharp. Derek let out something between a scoff and a curse. "You're bluffing." But I wasn't. I kept my hands folded in front of me. My mother's health fund was drained in the last year of her life. She had appointments she never attended, claims she never signed, medications she never used, all processed under her name. And the reimbursement checks? I paused. Deposited into a separate account. One my name was never on. The judge leaned forward slightly. "Do you have documentation?" "Yes." I handed over the second folder. I had triple-checked every page. "These are copies from the insurance board and our family physician." I also requested digital logs from the state Medicare system. My mother's account was flagged for unusual activity after her passing. That's how I found out. My father shifted in his chair. The silence around him had changed, no longer neutral. Now it held weight. I kept going. Her signature was forged on 6 claim forms, all dated during weeks when she was hospitalized. She couldn't even hold a pen by then. The judge read quickly, flipping page after page. "And you say the funds were redirected to a secondary account?" "Yes." I cross-referenced the routing number with an account my father opened 3 months before her decline. The account was drained a week after her funeral. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired, like I'd been holding up a wall for months, and now it was finally crumbling, one documented lie at a time. Derek leaned toward my father and whispered, but I heard it anyway. "You told me everything was handled." My father didn't reply. His eyes never left the folder. The judge closed the file. "This is serious. These are federal-level allegations." I nodded. "I know. That's why I waited. I wanted the court to hear it from me, directly." There was a brief silence before the judge turned to the clerk. "Order a forensic audit, full financial review. I want access logs, transfer history, prescription records, everything tied to this case and these accounts." Then he looked back at me. "Is there anything else?" I hesitated, just for a second. "There's one more thing. The nurse who stayed with my mother during her final weeks. She kept a journal. She logged every visitor, every conversation. She gave it to me after the funeral. I didn't read it until this week." The judge raised an eyebrow. "And?" "She wrote that one night my father left the house around midnight. When he came back, he smelled like liquor and said something that never made sense. It's all in her name now, just the way she wanted." But her will hadn't changed yet. Not officially. That didn't happen until 2 weeks later. For a moment, no one said anything. Then my father's lawyer stood and said, "We request a recess." That was when I finally looked at Dad. Really looked. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even defiant. He was small. Just a man in a suit with papers he couldn't control anymore. I stood quietly. I didn't need to speak again. The damage was done. I remembered the night my mother died, how quiet the house had been, how she looked when I touched her cheek one last time, like someone who had already forgiven us all, even when we didn't deserve it. I wondered sitting there if Dad had looked at her the same way I did that night, or if he was already thinking about bank accounts and paperwork. I'd spent months thinking I was paranoid, going through bills, tax forms, health summaries. Everyone told me to let it go. "It won't bring her back," Evelyn had said gently, just trying to keep me from falling apart. But it wasn't about bringing her back. It was about not letting her vanish in silence. I remember opening that email from the insurance company, the one that didn't match any date I knew. It was a clerical error, they said. But I didn't believe in errors anymore. Not when it came to my father. Every misstep he made felt too perfectly timed. I thought I'd feel proud saying those two words aloud. Medical fraud. I didn't. I just felt hollow. Like I'd spent every last bit of strength getting here. And now all that was left was air. But the room had changed. Not just because of what I said, but because of what it meant. For the first time, I didn't feel like the daughter. I felt like the adult in the room. I glanced at the people in the room, the ones who came thinking this was just another family squabble over money. Some of them were from Dad's side, some were old neighbors. Most had stayed silent through it all, but now they looked at me differently. Not with pity, with something else. Maybe respect, maybe shame. I didn't need their approval, but I felt their shift. I looked down at my hands. They weren't shaking anymore. For weeks, I'd rehearsed everything in my head, afraid I'd fumble, afraid he'd twist it, make me look hysterical. But when the moment came, my voice had held. Because the truth has a weight all its own, heavier than fear, louder than doubt. Outside, I could hear a lawnmower start somewhere beyond the courthouse walls. Ordinary life, still moving. But inside that room, everything had tilted. And my father knew it. I didn't win. I just stopped losing. "That's an honest mistake," Derek said. He didn't even look up when he said it, just flipped a page in the file like he was reading off a grocery list instead of defending what looked like financial theft. I didn't respond right away. I let the words hang there. Honest mistake. I wanted the courtroom to hear how soft they sounded, how easy it was for him to say something like that after everything. I looked at the judge, then back at Derek. Then I leaned slightly forward and said, "Would you mind repeating that into the microphone?" He froze, just a flicker. But it was enough. I saw his jaw tighten, the way it always did when he was caught off guard, like a schoolboy who hadn't studied for the test, and just realized this one actually counted. He cleared his throat and muttered, "It was a clerical error. The report misattributed some disbursements. These things happen." The judge raised an eyebrow. He was quiet, but his pen stopped moving. I looked over at my father. He hadn't said a word since the audit findings were read aloud. Discrepancies in the fund withdrawals, patterns that pointed to intentional redirection, and most damning, funds moved in my name that I never touched, never even knew about. He was pale now, not embarrassed, just calculating. "Do you deny requesting those disbursements under Claire's authorization?" the judge asked him. My father didn't answer. And then I did something I hadn't done in months. I spoke without fear. "Your Honor, those medical records weren't just altered. They were rewritten. Dates shifted, names blurred, signatures forged. I know because I went through every file myself. Twice." The courtroom was silent. I could feel my breath in my chest, slow and steady, but heavier than before. I was told I couldn't afford to keep Mom in full-time care, that our budget was tight. I sold her jewelry. I canceled her home nurse and stayed with her myself. Meanwhile, my father and Derek were draining the account. And when I confronted them, they told me I was overreacting. I could hear someone shift in their chair behind me. Maybe one of Derek's interns. Maybe my father's new wife. I didn't care anymore. The judge adjusted his glasses. Mr. Whitmore, do you wish to respond? Still nothing from my father. Derek leaned in, whispering urgently in his ear. My father waved him off, and then finally he spoke. My daughter was emotional. She wasn't capable of managing the account. We stepped in to stabilize things. That word again. Emotional. It always came up when he wanted to shut me down without saying anything overtly cruel. I was her power of attorney, I said. I was on every document, until you removed me, quietly. The judge nodded. Ms. Whitmore, is it true that you were removed from account oversight without a formal hearing or written notice? Yes, and I have the time-stamped emails where I asked why. No one answered. There was a beat of silence, the kind that grows so big, you can hear the hum of the lights overhead. Then the judge spoke again. In that case, based on the audit and the current testimony, I am ruling that the will as submitted is valid. The deed transfer stands. This property belongs to Claire Whitmore. My ears rang, not from noise, from relief. But that relief was short-lived. However, the judge continued, due to the irregularities in the fund handling, I'm referring this case to the county's fraud division for review. This court cannot render criminal judgment, but the findings warrant further investigation. That was the moment Derek stood up. Your Honor, may we request a recess before moving forward? He didn't wait for an answer. He just turned and walked toward the hallway outside the courtroom, motioning for my father to follow. And they did, without looking at me. I didn't move. I just sat there, watching the door swing shut behind them. It didn't feel like victory. Not yet. It felt like the ground had shifted, and I was the only one who knew which way was up. I leaned back slowly. My palms were damp. I rested them on the bench, trying to steady myself. An older woman in the back row gave me a small nod. I didn't know her, but I nodded back. I don't think anyone clapped or whispered or celebrated. It wasn't that kind of win. It was the kind where you realize the truth didn't set you free. It just gave you something solid to stand on. For now. I knew this wasn't over. Legal fallout meant depositions, more hearings, maybe even media. And I was tired. So damn tired. But I wasn't afraid anymore. The truth was ugly, but it was mine. My voice didn't shake when I spoke. My hands didn't flinch when I held up the files. I had walked into this building alone, carrying nothing but a binder and the kind of quiet pain that most people never see. And I'd walked out with the one thing they thought I couldn't claim without permission. My name. My father didn't win. Derek didn't win. The gaslighting, the theft, the silence, none of it won. I didn't win either. Not exactly. But I stopped losing. And that was enough. I stood outside the courthouse, the late afternoon sun hitting the back of my neck. The stone steps behind me felt colder than they should have for spring. Or maybe that was just my nerves. I had one page in my hand, printed in large, plain font. No logos, no drama, just the truth. I'm not here to accuse anyone, I said, letting the cameras focus. I'm not here to shame or to seek pity. I'm here to say something I should have said a long time ago. Silence isn't strength, it's surrender. There was a flicker of shutters. Reporters leaned in, but they were quiet. No one interrupted me. I don't think they expected a woman in her 50s, standing alone in navy slacks and a wrinkled blouse, to hold a press conference. I didn't expect it either, but after the court ruled in my favor, I knew I couldn't walk away like nothing had happened. That would have been the old me. I was taught that family matters should stay inside the family, that loyalty meant keeping secrets, even when they hurt. I was wrong. I paused, letting the breeze catch the corner of the page. My hands didn't shake. I had worried they might. They didn't. For years, I believed I was overreacting. I told myself I was lucky. I had a roof, I had a daughter, I had people who tolerated me. But tolerance isn't love, and inheritance isn't owed. It's earned. My father taught me how to pay bills. He never taught me how to stand up to him. I saw Derek standing across the street near the courthouse fountain. He wasn't hiding, just observing. His tie was loose, his phone in hand, and for once, no smugness on his face. He didn't expect this either. I wasn't performing. I wasn't attacking. I was simply done being quiet. I've had every excuse whispered in my ear. You're too sensitive. It's not worth the fight. Just let it go. Letting it go is what got us here. I folded the paper in half and kept speaking. Some of you may think this is about money. It's not. Money was just the tool. This is about dignity, about being erased by your own blood and told to smile while it happens. There were people listening now, not just reporters, a few locals I didn't know, a couple courthouse clerks I'd seen for weeks but never spoken to, and one young woman in jeans and a blazer, holding a mic she never lifted. I never wanted revenge, I said. I wanted acknowledgement. I wanted to stop pretending everything was fine. And I wanted to remind anyone else who's been told to sit still and be grateful. You're not imagining it. If it hurts, it matters. The crowd didn't clap. I didn't want them to. I didn't come here for validation. I came here to end something. And in doing that, maybe start something else. I stepped down from the makeshift podium and walked toward the street. No questions, no photos, just footsteps behind me and the sound of low murmurs. Halfway down the block, I felt someone catch up beside me. It was the young woman with the mic. That was brave, she said quietly. I nodded, not stopping. I'm not covering it for scandal, she added. I want to write about the silence, about how it breaks people before they even know they're broken. That made me stop. I turned to her. She looked barely 30, freckles under her eyes, soft voice, no rush in her posture. What's your name? Jenna, she said. Freelance, mostly. I was covering the probate cases for a local piece. Your story stuck with me. I wanted to tell her it wasn't a story. It was my life. But that felt unnecessary. She already knew. You can write whatever you want, I said. Just don't call me a victim. I survived a lot of things, but not because I'm fragile. I survived because I waited. And waiting, that almost ruined me. She didn't write anything down. She just listened, then nodded once, respectfully, and walked away. Back home that evening, I made a cup of tea. No lights on. Just the sound of the kettle and the slow hum of the fridge. I stood by the window, watching the sun bleed out behind the neighbors' hedges, and thought about how strange it was that peace never feels like fireworks. It's just the absence of noise. I hadn't heard from Emma. I didn't expect to. But part of me still wished. There was no gloating in me, just a tired kind of sadness that no court win could fix. Family isn't something you replace. It just becomes something else. When the mail slid through the slot, I didn't move right away. Bills, mostly. Some junk ads. And then one envelope. Cream-colored, handwritten, no return address. My name, spelled out in clean cursive. I opened it slowly. The paper inside was folded once. A single line. I think it's time you knew what he promised me too. It was signed, in shaky ink, by Linda, my father's second wife. I didn't recognize the handwriting at first. The envelope had no return address, just my name, written in a careful, slanted script that looked afraid to press too hard. For a moment, I considered tossing it. I was tired of court papers and sympathy notes from people who hadn't called in years. But something about the way the ink curled at the ends of each letter made me pause. I sat down at the kitchen table and opened it. It started simply. I should have said something sooner. That was the first line. No greeting, no excuses, just a confession. Thin as breath and twice as heavy. Her name didn't appear until halfway through, but I knew who it was by the second paragraph. Denise, my father's second wife, the woman I'd blame for staying quiet while he stripped me of everything. She wrote that she'd been watching all along, not just the courtroom scenes, but the years leading up to it. The forged accounts, the whispered threats, the pressure he'd put on everyone, neighbors, lawyers, even his own friends, to keep me cornered, silent, and small. She said she'd watched my mother's legacy be chipped away piece by piece while pretending not to notice the dust collecting around her feet. I was afraid, she wrote. He made me feel like I owed him my silence. I stopped there and let the letter fall onto the table. My fingers had started trembling, and not from anger. It was something quieter, something I didn't know how to name. Not relief, not vindication, just silence breaking. I had imagined so many versions of Denise in my mind, passive, cold, complicit. But I'd never imagined her scared. I'd never pictured her folding laundry while wondering if she was watching a crime she couldn't prove. I'd never considered that maybe she had been the audience I never saw, the one who flinched every time he raised his voice at me, the one who noticed when he lost another bank statement, the one who felt the weight of his lies before they ever made it to court. She offered to testify. If there's ever another hearing, I'll be there. I'll say, everything I should have said years ago. I read that line again, then a third time. It felt like someone placing a coat around my shoulders after I'd already learned how to live with the cold. But I didn't cry. I didn't smile either. I just sat still, letting the silence swell between me and the paper. I never responded. Not because I was angry, not anymore, and not because I didn't believe her. I did. Every word in that letter carried the weight of someone who'd been trapped behind a glass wall, watching a fire she couldn't call out. But I didn't need more trials. Not legal ones. Not emotional ones. I'd spent too many years trying to win a verdict from people who were never going to see the full picture. I didn't want Denise's guilt. I didn't need her on a witness stand or her voice cracking in front of a judge. I had already stood in the courtroom, told my truth, and walked out with my dignity intact. Sometimes silence speaks louder when you don't need it to prove anything anymore. I folded the letter and slid it into the back of my old recipe book, between the pages where my mother's handwriting lived, a place for women who'd said more in ink than in breath. Later that afternoon, I went back to the house. Not my father's. Not anymore. Technically, it was in escrow, waiting to be sold to some couple from upstate who thought original crown molding was romantic. I didn't blame them. They didn't know what kind of ghost lived in that wood. The key still worked. I stepped inside and let the door close behind me. It didn't smell the same. No lemon polish, no Sunday roast. Just air and faint dust, like a room that had forgotten it once held a family. I walked slowly down the hallway, past the old coat hooks, past the framed photo of my father shaking hands with someone he'd later sue. Everything was exactly where I remembered it, and yet nothing felt the same. The living room was stripped bare. The curtains were gone, the shelves had been emptied, but the walls still remembered. I stood in front of the fireplace and ran my hand along the mantel. That's where my mother used to line up birthday cards each March, always in order of height. I hadn't thought about that in years. She'd polish the brass knobs on the front door every Saturday morning, humming quietly to herself, like she was tuning the house to a frequency only she could hear. I walked over and placed my hand on that doorknob. The brass was dulled now, smudged by strangers and time. But in my mind, I saw her reflection in it, just for a second, bent over, smiling, rubbing the surface like it was a mirror to something she'd almost forgotten. I stood there with my hand resting on it, not turning it, just feeling the weight of memory press gently into my palm. Sometimes peace doesn't come with fanfare. It doesn't look like justice or sound like applause. Sometimes it's just knowing you don't owe anyone your pain anymore, that no one gets to rewrite your story, not even the ones who watched it unfold. That day, I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I didn't leave a note or take anything from the house. I just stood there, breathing in the last chapter of a place that had tried to silence me. And I listened, not for forgiveness, not for permission, just for the quiet. And this time it didn't feel empty. The realtor had kind eyes. That's what I noticed first. Not the polished smile, not the crisp gray blazer, but the way her eyes softened when I said, I'm ready to let it go. No bargaining, no holding back. Just those 7 words, and a final breath I didn't realize I'd been holding for years. I didn't tell her the whole story. I didn't explain how many winters I spent watching that front lawn grow wild because no one else bothered to mow it. I didn't say how many times I sat on the porch waiting for a call that never came. I just said, list it at whatever you think is fair. I won't be around for the negotiations. She blinked. You sure you don't want to wait and see how the market? I've waited long enough. I left with nothing but a suitcase, my mother's rosary beads, and the garden bench Dad never once sat on. Funny, that bench had held more of me than he ever did. I had the movers pick it up last. I watched them struggle with it, two men groaning under the weight. It was solid oak, heavier than it looked, just like everything else in that house. The new town was small, tucked between a sleepy lake and a bookstore that still smelled of dust and paper. The kind of place where people nod at you in the morning, but don't ask questions you're not ready to answer. I rented a little cottage with peeling white shutters and a warped window frame that let in the wind when it rained. I didn't mind. I liked the way the draft curled around my ankles when I sat with a book and a cup of tea. It made me feel alive in a way I hadn't in years. There was a patch of dry dirt behind the cottage, just enough for roses. I planted them the second week. Red ones, mostly. A few yellow, for balance. My mother used to say yellow roses forgave things red roses never could. I didn't believe in that kind of magic, but I planted them anyway. I thought about Dad once in a while, mostly in the quiet moments, like when the kettle screamed louder than it needed to, or when a truck backfired down the street. There was no rage anymore, no heat, just a silence so vast it felt like standing at the edge of an empty auditorium after the applauses died. I got used to the rhythm of the town, the librarian who never charged late fees, the dog who waited outside the bakery every Thursday morning, the way no one looked twice when I walked alone. It wasn't loneliness, it was peace. I never told anyone my full name, just Claire. No Watson, no history. I didn't need it here. It was the first time in decades I wasn't introduced as someone's daughter, someone's mistake, someone's second best. I read books I'd always meant to, cooked meals that only I liked, fell asleep without checking my phone. For once, the silence wasn't punishment. It was permission. One morning, I sat on the bench in my little yard, watching a bee hover around the new buds on the rose bush. I had a paperback open in my lap, but I wasn't reading. Just breathing, just being. Then I heard it. Soft footsteps on gravel, hesitant but sure. I looked up. A girl, maybe 19, stood at the gate. Her jeans were too long for her legs, bunched at the ankles. She held a folded piece of paper in one hand. The other gripped the strap of a faded backpack like it was keeping her upright. "Are you Claire Watson?" she asked. I didn't speak right away. Her voice had a tremble I recognized, that quiet desperation of someone trying not to sound too broken. I stood. "Who's asking?" "My name's Mia," she said. I think you might have known my mother." She looked nothing like anyone I remembered. But then again, time distorts things. Faces blur. Names get rearranged in memory like pages torn from the middle of a book. "I'm not here to ask for anything," she added quickly. "Just, I found something, and I thought you should see it." She held out the paper. I took it, my hand brushing hers. Cold fingers, nervous grip. I unfolded it slowly. My own name stared back at me in looping handwriting. Familiar, sharp. It was a letter, not from Mia, from someone else, someone I hadn't thought of in years. "I didn't know where else to go," Mia said quietly, "but she told me if anything ever happened, to find you." The air felt heavier, not suffocating, just dense, like the space around us understood the weight of whatever this was. I nodded once and stepped aside. "Come in, it's all right." She hesitated, then walked through the gate. Her shoes crunched over the gravel. Behind her, the roses swayed gently, like they'd been waiting for someone too. I didn't know what the letter would say. I didn't know what Mia's story was. But for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel like closing the door. I sat back on the bench and watched her eyes scan the garden. "That's a lot of red," she said, almost smiling. "Some things I replied, are worth growing no matter how much they remind you. She didn't ask what I meant. She just nodded and sat beside me, quiet as a secret. Maybe not everything needed to be explained. Maybe some stories didn't end. They just changed addresses. She looked younger than I expected. Her hair was tied back in a loose bun, clipboard in one hand, recorder in the other. She introduced herself, said her name was Harper, from the Sunday Weekly. She'd been following the court case since it made local news. Apparently, the part where the judge dropped his pen had gone semi-viral. I hadn't realized people were paying that much attention. She said, I want to tell your story, not just the court drama and the whole thing. Who you are, what you survived. I studied her face. She wasn't selling pity. She looked like someone who had seen something she couldn't unsee. That kind of knowing doesn't come from reading headlines. It comes from living them. I told her, I'll do it, but only if you write it for every woman who stayed quiet too long, not just me. She nodded like she'd been waiting for those words. We sat outside on the bench I took with me from the old house, the one under the dogwood tree, worn smooth by seasons and silence. She hit record. I started talking, and for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like I was trying to prove anything. I told her about the mornings I'd wake up already bracing for his disapproval, about the nights I'd go to bed tracing my own failures like worry beads, hoping maybe tomorrow I'd do something right, about the look in my mother's eyes when she thought no one was watching, the one that told me she was trapped, just like I would be. I told her about the courtroom, the polished lies, the way my father leaned back in his chair like the outcome was already written. And I told her about the 2 words I spoke that ended it, not because they were clever, but because they were true, because I stopped defending myself and simply described him. She didn't interrupt. She didn't rush me. Every now and then, she'd nod or whisper, I understand. And I think she really did. When I finished, she sat there a while before turning off the recorder. The breeze lifted her hair. The sun had shifted lower, softer. There was peace in the silence that followed, not the kind you chase, the kind you earn. She said, this will help people. I believed her. Later that week, I mailed her an envelope. Inside was the only photo I had of my mother smiling. It was creased at the corners, edges worn down from being touched too many times. On the back, I'd written one line, don't forget her. The article came out 2 Sundays later. It wasn't sensational. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, measured, devastating in its simplicity. My name was in the title, but the story was filled with other names. Names of women who'd written in after the trial. Names of mothers, sisters, daughters, all of them with stories too close to mine. Reading it felt like standing in a room full of strangers who somehow already knew me, who didn't need me to explain the kind of grief that doesn't make headlines. One of the letters came from a woman named Ruth. She said she hadn't spoken to her own daughter in 10 years, said she'd started planting roses again after reading the article. Another woman, younger, said, you reminded me I could walk away and still be whole. I kept those letters in a box next to the bench, not as trophies, as proof that sometimes telling the truth doesn't burn things down. Sometimes it clears the air enough for something to bloom. I walk most mornings now. The town is small, and people smile when they pass. No one asks what I used to be. No one calls me by his last name. I've planted 3 rose bushes. 2 of them are doing well. The third's still struggling. I overwatered it, then let it dry out. But it's trying. I like that about it. There's a bookstore down the street where I read for an hour every Thursday. The owner, Margaret, keeps the kettle on and doesn't ask questions. That to me feels like kindness. Sometimes I think about the house. Not often. It's not pain that comes up, just distance. Like looking at an old photograph and barely recognizing your own face. My father never called after the ruling, never wrote. I didn't expect him to. But once in a while, when I see someone tilt their head in that familiar way, or hear a tone that sounds too much like his, my chest tightens, just for a second. Then it passes. I don't need him to know I won. I just needed to stop letting him define me. If this story felt familiar, if it reminded you of a silence you've lived through, I hope you'll share it. Thank you for listening. And if you want to hear more stories like this, you know where to find me. I wasn't just his daughter, I was my mother's daughter too. And I'm finally proud of that.